picture's funny. Donkey Kong Country is my favorite video game franchise of all time, and in a few months, it will be celebrating its 30th anniversary. And even as someone who was -10 when the game released, that still makes me feel kinda old. The fine folks at Rareware truly had something special with this first game. Even if you ignore the graphical style of the game, the level design, the soundtrack, and everything about its atmosphere absolutely holds up in a very unusual way. Looking back, this really was one of the best platformers of that era, and in a sense, it kinda gave the industry a peek into the future by showing just how immersive games can be in the third dimension. But let's not go that far. Well, yet. DKC1 was a very successful game, at least from what I could find. But even with that, Rare was nowhere close to being done with this franchise, as they had a vision for the series that not many people were even aware of. It seems like they really had a fondness for the characters and worlds that they created, and truly wanted to do more grander and cooler things with them. And by the time that it would eventually release, a lot of pretty major events were going on in the industry, especially on Nintendo's side of things. However, despite all the pressure and chaos happening around them, Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy Kong's Quest would release at the end of 1995. People who pronounce it like this are weird. DKC2 was a game that was universally acclaimed by everybody. Whether you had any nostalgia for it or not, this game was, is, and will probably always be considered one of the greatest games of all time. And on the surface, I could totally see why. There was just something about it that made you feel like you were embarking on the expedition of a lifetime. And just as an added bonus, it just so happened to be that my favorite character of all time was starring in it. This game was just checking all the boxes for me, and grabbed my attention in a way that most retro games typically don't. And it also helped that this game came out during the perfect time on NSO. Around the time that DKC2 hit the online service was also around the time that I was getting back into the series thanks to DKC1. It was also around the time where the world was in a very chaotic place, and I quite literally had like nothing better to do. That's just me being honest. So, needless to say, I had a lot of hype excitement going into DKC2 for the first time, and when I came out of it, when I finally beat the game, I realized that somehow, someway, even with all the praise that this game gets, even with how excited I was to finally experience it, DKC2 was somehow even better than I could have possibly imagined. But before we can get into that, what is this? What is that? So, Donkey Kong, the king of the jungle, the muscular, buff behemoth that strikes fear into the hearts of his opponents, got captured. Damn. This game was later ported to the Game Boy Advance, and actually starts off with a cutscene showing how Donkey Kong got captured. So, how about we all sit down, make ourselves comfortable, if you haven't already, and watch with our own two eyes how the king of the jungle gets abducted. Beautiful. Now, I realize that I am making fun of it a lot, but Donkey Kong being absent for this adventure wasn't a move that many saw coming, but in practice, it was actually a very effective technique in getting you invested. It was actually one of the reasons why I was initially drawn to this game. I mean, how could you have a Donkey Kong Country game without a Donkey Kong? Like, it is a bit confusing without context, but I really do admire the fact that before things get going, hell, before you even start the game, DKC2 already starts things off with a mystery. With DK out of the picture, Diddy is now the main protagonist of the game, and no offense to DK or any of his fans, but I could not be happier. Diddy is such an important character to me, and I know that makes me very biased, but that on top of just how much more fun I had with him in the original game, makes me totally okay with him being center stage. But Diddy actually won't be doing this adventure completely by himself. After all, the partner mechanic was one of the defining things that DKC1 had going for it, so it totally makes sense that they would bring it back alongside an entirely new partner that would assist our hero in his adventure. Nerds and Geeks, Dixie Kong. And to be honest, I love her just as much as Diddy. I've always been a fan of her design. I find that the pink attire complements the yellow swirly hair well. Her personality is just as loud and energetic as Diddy's, which I love. But the thing that Dixie does so well, and the reason why I adore her so much, is that she's a female protagonist who plays a massive part in the game's plot and design without falling into the cliche of acting hyper-masculine in order to have a purpose. Characters like Dixie show that that way of female representation can still be very well done, but it's not the only way to do it. And for being one of the only cases of this, from what I've consumed anyway, she is the perfect example of that. And there you have it. We officially now have our duo for this game. And can I just say, these two complement each other so much better than Donkey and Diddy did. Diddy more or less remains the same as he was in the last game, but the defining trait that Dixie has is her ability to hover in the air via her swirly hair. She can also hold barrels over her head, as well as overall being the most agile out of the two. All of which are things that Diddy can't really do as well. It genuinely feels like each of them was specifically designed to clean house in an area that the other was lacking in, and that alone makes me prefer this combo over Donkey and Diddy. But on top of that, DKC2 also introduces new tag actions. These actions range from throwing your partner horizontally at stronger enemies, or throwing them vertically to reach higher areas. The point that I want to bring up with this is that in the last game, it never really felt like Donkey or Diddy were really working together that much. Really, the furthest that they went with that is when one of them got hit, the other would just take their place. Which was functional, but they never really felt like a team at the end of the day. These tag actions make it far easier to believe that these two are actually working together. And I don't know, I just feel more connected to the duo as a result of that. However, even though Diddy and Dixie proved more than capable by themselves, it didn't stop the entire Kong family from also joining in on the quest as well. I guess seeing how the king of the jungle has just been kidnapped, they figured that all hands need to be on deck for this adventure, and in practice, these guys are only really a means to bring back things like funky flights and saving and things of that nature. But if we're talking aid that's more useful, the Kongs once again gain the help of the animal buddies. Returning from DKC1 are Rambi, Enguarde, and Squawks, with both Rambi and Enguarde being pretty much the exact same as they've always been, but a key difference this time around is that they can actually pull off these supercharged moves, which makes playing as them exponentially more satisfying. Squawks, however, has actually been completely reworked into being like most of the other animal friends. He's straight up one of my undisputed favorites to play as now, even if the only reason I say that is because of how smooth his flying control is. Going over to the newcomers of the squad, we have Squitter, Rattly, and Purple Squawks. The only thing really notable about Quawks is that he can float the Kongs downward in only one level. It's not as bad as it sounds, trust me. But in the case of Rattly and Squitter, good god. Squitter can spit out webs that act as projectiles, but can also use them as platforms, and Rattly can jump really high and has a supercharged move that increases that maximum jump height even further. And both of these guys have some of the coolest designs ever. Now, this seems like I'm exaggerating a little bit, mainly because I am, but their design goes such a long way ensuring that these characters actually feel good to play. This is the most apparent with Rattly, because given the fact that he's designed to look like a pogo stick, it makes his hitbox super clear to the player, and just makes bouncing off of enemies feel great, which is something that some people just didn't do as well. Making this even better is the fact that there are entire levels where you get to play as these guys, and honestly, I'm a big fan of pretty much all of them. Yes, that does include animal antics. The Squawk section does give me a panic attack, but that's only for like 2 minutes, if that. But anyways, with help from honestly more people than they really need, Diddy and Dixie are now finally ready to travel to the dark, creepy land of Crocodile Isle. Upon arriving, you might notice that this place seems very scary yet intimidating and somewhere that you really shouldn't be, until you realize that the areas that you're going through and the levels that you're playing makes you sad. Or rather, made me sad. I played through this game for the first time, having the biggest frown on my face, and when I beat the final boss, I just remember going up into my room, curling into a ball, and just started sobbing. I was depressed for many weeks afterwards. I had to see multiple different therapists, and later came to the realization that DKC2 broke me. And you wanna know the reason why? It's because I knew that I would never play a platformer with level design this godly ever again. DKC2's level design is hands down the best I've seen in any platformer. Everything, from the enemy placement, the stage specific gimmicks, and the general variety that is on display is sublime. I really do find it incredibly mind-blowing how much they managed to do with these levels while still keeping the flow and rhythm of the DKC formula intact. The platforming that you will be doing in this game far exceeds its predecessor in terms of variety and challenge. These levels throw a lot at you, whether it be new enemy types, new platforming challenges, new platforming hazards, or really just whatever the hell it feels like. Naturally, this leads to an adventure that is a lot harder than before, but it also means that it is impossible for the game to ever feel bland or repetitive for more than 2 nanoseconds. There is rarely ever a dull moment in this game, and somehow, someway, it's able to achieve all of this while still having that flow and crunch that makes classic DKC so satisfying to play. But believe it or not, we really are just scratching the surface when talking about just how much is actually in these levels. Because secrets, collectibles, bonus rooms, whatever you want to call them, they're back and they are unquestionably better than ever. Every level in this game has both a bonus barrel and DK coin to hunt down. And admittedly, these MacGuffins can be hidden in some very obtuse places, more so with the bonus barrels because the areas they're hidden in are wild, but when you do find them, you are now tasked with completing one of 3 challenges, and nearly every single one of them are short, straightforward, and don't overstay their welcome so as not to disrupt the flow of the game. At the end of every challenge, you are then rewarded with a Creme coin, and upon collecting 15 of them in each world, Clubba, this very weirdly buff Kremling, will grant you access to the secret world. Wait, shouldn't you be helping the other Kremling? I legit don't think they could have implemented the secret world any better. For one, each secret world canon takes you to a different level, most of which are scaled to the same difficulty as the rest of the levels in that world. The levels themselves are some of the best in the entire game, pushing certain ideas to their absolute breaking point, and even coming up with a few of their own. The bonus barrels now reward you with DK coins instead of Creme coins, and if you happen to miss one of these barrels, you have the luxury of traveling to the secret world anytime you want as soon as you pay Clubba his money. This game expands on the secrets so much that it honestly makes the first game seem like it didn't even have any. And again, this just acts as another example of DKC2 just going above and beyond in order to create the best experience possible. But part of making an unforgettable experience is producing an unforgettable soundtrack. The music in DKC1 was split between 3 composers, which resulted in a soundtrack that was filled to the brim with tons of variety in terms of its atmosphere. Now, what if I told you that the sequel not only has that same amount of variety, if not more so, but it's all composed by one man? Yes, it is appropriate to call me insane, but I don't think you could possibly get more insane than David Mother Effing Wise, because this man single-handedly created one of the greatest video game OSTs ever. From Clomp Romp all the way to Crocodile Cacophony, the soundtrack is pulling out all the stops all the freaking time. The variety present on display is bonkers. Yes, I mean that one, absolutely. Every track paints such a vastly different picture than the last, whether it's peaceful and soothing, dark and treacherous, or bouncy and whimsical. The music in this game is constantly shaking things up and finding new ways to immerse and encapsulate you into its world. And it's thanks to how masterfully composed the music is that allows for the experience to feel like an actual adventure. I could only imagine that there are loads of emotions one can experience when embarking on such a deadly mission like this. And Wise did such an amazing job in exploring and portraying those emotions through sounds. I know many people still hold DKC2's OST as being the be-all end-all best in the entire franchise, but me personally, I think that some of Wise's later works have resonated with me a bit more, but even still, DKC2's OST is one that I will always respect simply because of how ahead of its time it is in so many ways. Like, keep in mind, you're hearing all these songs on this thing. And while the sound hardware on the Super Nintendo is incredible and absolutely nothing to sneeze at, it will forever blow my mind how a soundtrack this immersive and this cinematic is a product of the SNES. At least in my eyes, you cannot get more legendary than that. But very few things in this world are as legendary as the way in which this game ends. It's not that exciting. Sit down. After all your trials and tribulations, you finally find Donkey Kong at the very top of Crocodile Isle. Everybody celebrates for roughly 3 seconds before Donkey Kong gets taken off somewhere else, with the two Kongs giving chase. So apparently there was this ship called the Flying Croc that swooped by while the Kongs were distracted, and that is the very place where the abductor is hiding. But you can't just go straight into the final boss without having a race against Screech the Bird, okay? What do you think this is? Yeah, I can't really tell you why you have to do a race before you fight the final boss. Something about this has always seemed very off to me. To its credit though, it's actually very well designed and challenging, but something about this level's placement just feels sorta random. But afterwards, the two dash headfirst into the cockpit and into the final boss of the game, Captain K. Rool. And I know literally everything about the game spoiled the final boss for me, but that's not what's important right now. What is important is how this is one of the most cleverly designed final bosses I have ever played. The fight is incredibly intense given just how much this man has stuffed into his gun. So apparently he has actual cannonballs, spiked cannonballs that ignore the laws of gravity, torches, different colored gases, a vacuum, all of which are things that you have to dodge, by the way. The only way you'll be able to score a hit is if you throw the cannonball back into his gun, but he will fire it back at you after a couple seconds, which always ensures that you're on edge and that the tension constantly remains high throughout the battle. Again, this sounds like a lot, because it is, but I find that this is such a perfect amalgamation of not only everything that you've learned, but what really makes this game so good. It's always engaging, never a dull moment in sight. It throws so many new things at you all the time while making sure to keep everything fair and balanced. It's just so good. The rematch in the Secret World isn't it. It's just not it. So after you beat K. Rool for the first time and watch as DK uppercuts him into oblivion, he finds his way into the secret world and you undergo more or less the exact same fight, except it's a lot more condensed and isn't really as good if I'm being honest. To its credit, the attacks aren't any easier to dodge, but as soon as you get the cannonball and throw it back into his gun, the fight just ends. Especially for a secret final boss, this was very disappointing all things considered. But when all that's said and done, K. Rool then gets blown into the core of the secret world, and the Kongs then make their escape, leading into one of my favorite screens in any video game. Wait, whoa, no, wait, hold on, no, wrong screen, no. This is probably going to sound hyperbolic, but I don't think there was a better possible way they could have ended this game. Literally everything I adore about it is captured in this one beautiful image. It's simply just breathtaking. But when thinking about the reason why I hold DKC2 so near and dear to me, it really was thanks to all the hype. Because between me getting back into the series with DKC1, witnessing just how cool this game was looking from afar, and how ecstatic I was to see it come to NSO, my first playthrough of this game had a ton of build up leading into it. And as I was playing through these levels, as I was listening to the music, and especially as I saw this screen for the first time, my mind was just in pieces given just how much this game exceeded my already very high expectations. For pretty much the rest of 2020, DKC2 was the only game I was playing. And seeing that it was also during the pandemic, you bet your bottom dollar that I was playing it before, after, and sometimes even during school hours. Because I'm savage like that. I have a lot of really positive memories with this game. And especially when the world was in such a chaotic place, it's always good to have those few good things to look back on. I mean, I was playing a lot of retro stuff in general during that time. I finally had an excuse to sit down and play some of the greatest games that the industry had to offer, as well as getting into franchises that I probably would have never gotten into otherwise. I've played tons of retro games prior to that point, and still play tons of them now, but whenever I think back to that time, these are the games that will always come to my mind first. But even though I still have a soft spot for all of those games, which includes the very game that got me back into the series, something about DKC2 simply hit different. I don't know what it is. I just cannot put my finger on why. But the fact that it carries such an intense aura of positivity whenever I think about it shows just how deep my love for the thing really is. Just to really show you what I mean, remember the cutscene of DK getting captured from the Game Boy Advance version? That is from an actual 80% playthrough that I did of that version of this game. In all honesty, I didn't have a super fun time with it, given just how much they messed with the physics, which caused a lot of questionable deaths. Like that. But even with that, I still played through the entire game and got to the final boss, because if you couldn't already tell, I really like this game. I still found plenty to love about that version regardless of how irritated I got. In fact, playing through that version made me realize that DKC2's vibe and world and general atmosphere was all I really needed to have a good time. Again, I just can't put my finger on what it is, but DKC2 just has something about it that's just so magical. That's not a term that I just hand out willy-nilly for every game that I play, but man, there are just those few experiences out there that truly deserve everyone's time, and DKC2 is absolutely, positively one of those very few games. It's also one of the few games to make me depressed, so take that for what you will.